All right, I'll keep my eyes on the doorbell. But yeah, let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Gresco. Welcome to the Antibody, which is a quarantine reading series. It's part of LitHub's virtual book channel. I'm so grateful. Before the audience arrived, we were talking about Wayétu and I were talking about the beautiful weather here in New York City. I've been very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for the sensible ruling, surprisingly sensible ruling, which came down yesterday from the Supreme Court, extending legal civil rights protections to gay and transgender people. A ruling which came on the heels of one of the most beautiful rallies here in New York City. I had the privilege of witnessing on Sunday as thousands, I think 15,000 is what I heard, marched, gathered to rally at the Brooklyn Museum, marched peacefully to say Black trans lives matter. Very grateful to have been able to witness that. And I'm grateful to be here tonight with you and with 3 artists of the written word who are going to share their work with us. Roy G. Guzmán is here, Genevieve Hudson is here, and Wayétu Moore is here. And I hope that you all will join me in taking a deep breath and just sitting back and getting yourself comfortable and appreciating their artistry. If you've joined us before, as many of you have, welcome back. If you are new here, here is how this works. We don't have a stage, sadly, but we do have a microphone. So we're going to honor the authors when they have the microphone, as each author is going to read to us for a little bit. At the end of the event, there will be time for questions and answers, so be ready for that. And the chat is public so that you can show your appreciation of the authors, and please show your appreciation of the authors. So yeah, please get those fingers clicking and clacking on your keyboards and your fingers tapping on your phones to welcome our first author, Genevieve Hudson. Originally from Alabama, Genevieve Hudson earned an MFA from Portland State University and has received Fulbright, MacDowell, and Vermont Studio Center fellowships. They're the author of the novel Boys of Alabama, the memoir A Little in Love with Everyone, and the collection Pretend We Live Here Stories. They live in Portland, Oregon, where they're joining us tonight. Please welcome Genevieve Hudson. Hi, Genevieve.
Hi, thank you so much, Brian, for having me tonight. I'm excited to be with you all and to read a little bit and also hear a little bit of what I know will be really great writing. Yeah, so like you said, I wrote the novel Boys of Alabama, which is what I'm going to be reading to you all from tonight. I am going to be reading from a place in the middle of the book. It doesn't need much context, but I'll orient you all a little bit to say it's a queer coming of age story about a German immigrant who moves to rural Alabama. And there's a lot of strange things going on in Alabama to the town that he moves into. Especially there is a political figure who is practicing some kind of strange types of like dark magic and Southern Christianity, and he's running for office. And Max, our narrator, is kind of taken with this political figure. And where I'll read from you, where I'm going to read from is at a spot in the book where Max is attending a campaign rally for the judge, which is this character's name. So I'll just pick up from there. When the judge got on his knees in the well-laid oak porch, Max almost expected a beam to shoot down from the heavens. Light him up or smite him, Max wasn't sure which. He closed his eyes. Was that what prayer was? Just closing his eyes? He wasn't sure what was supposed to happen after that. No God spoke to him, but for the first time he wondered if he could find a God in there, in the black silence of his own brain. He made his mind say, God? It was completely silent. He was alone with himself, like always. Max squinted at the judge through his pretend prayer, It unsettled him to see this noble man on his knees, mumbling to himself, and it moved him. Max wanted to get on his knees, too. He wanted to humble himself before something great. The judge began to shake, so Max closed his eyes. He didn't want to see it. The judge had the ability to change people. The bodies in the crowd had been changed. They shook and trembled in the same way the judge did. It was as if the judge possessed the power to twist and bend the will in the bodies of the people before him. Max wondered if the judge knew the limits of his own power. The judge's power reached out and grabbed Max by the heart. He felt the judge wrap around his beating pulse. Power entered him. Was that God? I have seen death, my friends, the judge said, quiet and slow. I have seen death, and I have seen the devil. I've looked him straight in the eyes, and I am here to tell you that the way of the Lord is not easy, but it is good. The world is a battlefield, and the right path is not always kind, but it will make sense in the end. God never promised us ease. He promised us love. He promised us himself in exchange for eternal life. Commit yourself to him and be free. Praise Jesus, the judge said. Amen. The prayer ended and the people were released back to conversation. Some strange and unsettling thing roiled through the bodies beside Max. One man began to act hyper. He laughed too loud, spit flecks of chewed burger onto the faces of the men while he talked. Max wondered what it was the judge had just done to everyone. He wondered because he felt it too. A surge of cortisol cruising his veins, swelling them thick as they could go. Maybe that's what God was. Maybe God was power. Max wanted more of it, whatever it was, even though it scared him. The moon remained even in the daylight, a moon so bright the sun couldn't wipe it away. Max concentrated on its craters, the blemished and intricate topography he could trace from the backyard. He might not understand science, but it still made him feel small. On his way out, the judge walked past Max. He stopped. He raised a finger above him, then drew it through the air and touched Max's chest. And with that gesture, Max felt like the judge had taken some of the sky and put it into his body. He expanded into blue. People like you, he said, are the people we need here. People like you are doing good things for our economy. Cars are Alabama's biggest export right now. You need to invite him to church. We would love to see y'all come with us to celebrate the good news. The good news, said Max. Jesus has risen, son, said the judge. And I'll stop there.
Wow, what a place to stop. I'm on the edge of my seat. Thank you so much. Can everyone please use the chat there to show your appreciation and show your love for Genevieve. That was really powerful and amazing. Anytime there's like scenes set in revivals, it's always very compelling to me. I've got questions, but I'm going to save them till the end. Instead, for now, I'm just going to say that you all out there should pick up a copy of Genevieve's new novel, Boys of Alabama, which you can do through that link that I'm sharing there to bookshop.org. Please support our authors, and Bookshop will also direct your order through your local independent bookstore, or if not through your local independent bookstore, it will go to a fund that will go towards supporting independent bookstores. So that's a good thing too. Very cool. Thank you again, Genevieve. Cool. Moving right along to our next reader, Roy G. Guzmán. Roy received a 2019 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and a 2017 Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship. Raised in Miami, Guzmán lives in Minneapolis, and Catrachos is Guzmán's first collection. Please get those fingers going and welcome Roy Guzmán. Hi, Roy.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much for that, Genevieve. I can't wait to read the book. Um, I I'm very happy to be with you tonight. It's been very yeah, I'm like in this like weird cloud, or I don't know what it is, but I found out this week that this weekend that half my family, I'm from Honduras, they're in Honduras, half my family has COVID, um, and my grandfather just passed yesterday. So he was buried today, and I want to dedicate this reading to him. So the first poem, I'll read two poems. The first one is called Catrachos. And Catrachos, the title of the collection as well, is it's a term that is explained in the book, but it has a lot of ties to U.S. imperialism in Central America. U.S. Americans wanting to become essentially emperors in Central America, and in some ways succeeding, and in some ways, finding a lot of resistance. And so Catrachos is a term that you can use for Hondurans, and it has all those roots. Catrachos. Time blunts the crooked to savage pews. Once on the sibling stumps of a beat Caribbean pine, my cousins invite me to sit. My legs fold like melted candles. If I'd worn the maracas sizzle skirt of my reveries, there beam liturgy. Maricón, maricón, maricón. Fold your hands, boy, walk straight, never graduate your hungers. Befuddlement, sloths on their tongues, their eyes, chapels of pebbles. We mount the esote tree, tia mama, my aunt, watch towers from the kitchen, a large pot of soup on the stove, pataste, Rapunzeled with dollars, moms, monogrammed early in the morning. I heed to my accuser's orders. Perch on the boulders, our mothers lay their clothes to mummify. Jostle against the lengthy hammock. Abuelo bought en el mercado. They knot my wrists with hands that have buried only mothers. I become their hummingbird embroidery, the ground on which their marbles rattle like homemade rockets. Hopscotch squares, sunrise on the sidewalk. Another underage infantry curls over. Nameless flowers ambush my scraped knees. I am the lasso of a small emptiness that once called me almighty. I am pushed into the dirt hole they dig for our G.I. Joes, rows of tanks, artillery. He won't do it, one cousin remarks. Another one shouts, "You're wrong." Somebody wheedles me to sit on a jagged set of stairs. For my performance, I smooth out the back pockets of my pants, my heady skirt. Any creases might behoove punishment. When I hear a gasp, another gasp. Whose girl am I? I am losing my part-time voice of a child. The rock casters disperse, shoeless, like the sounds of shacks crumpling under fathers. Flowers are plucked from the bushes, strewn on my knees. etiolated honeysuckles. The youngest pulls a chunk of grass, shakes his green-stained hands, unlatches blades from his fingers. I take a sniff of the carnations. I hear a chortle. This is my burial, a la Ana Mendieta. Through the window, Tia Mama scrutinizes the hubbub, storms outside in her flour-caked apron, hands glistening, water drops penetrating their anticipation into the ground. She pulls me by the hair. In the house, she unfastens my belt, strikes me with it, a newborn island on my cheek, the ghost of another body, my body. For supper, she serves us bland cauliflower soup. The scalding dam overfloods my throat. I avoid the white meridian scalps. When I finish, I ask for another ladleful. This appetite is now scratching the muted aqueducts. A folklore of vomit takes residence on my tongue as my cousins turn to me. The spoons shine on their faces. In this fresh body garden, the tangerine trees release their grip on the children from unforgiving floors. The little palms grace the ground before they crash. So this is a sort of a different tone of a poem. This is titled My Great-Grandmother's Egg Thief. And this great-grandmother was my grandfather's mother. So yes. And the title is the first line in the poem. My great-grandmother's egg thief was never officially charged, though she considered her son's wife prime suspect. Rita, my great-grandmother's name, never trusted her daughter-in-law, and maybe rightfully so. Mamachelas, hazel eyes, and light skin as myth goes, 2 reasons a man will let his Trojan horse loose. Though in this case, after the 3rd child died, she left my grandfather Jorge to raise 4 more children. She found another home with a soldier, a newfound pariah status, which is why when I took a drama class at the University of Chicago and we were studying Ibsen's A Doll's House, the renowned British actor who co-taught the course was appalled when I said Nora still had a future to look forward to, even in the 19th century. Surely, white feminism never met the Latinas in my family. And few things match the warmth of an egg right after it's been laid. During summer, eggshells babble on the ground, the evidence of a predator's mischief, a branch buttress nest disposal, or a bird content with gravity's assignment. A man was jailed 4 times for stealing 700 rare wild bird eggs, ospreys, golden eagles, red kites, peregrine falcons, merlins, red wings, avocets. In his residence, maps, climbing equipment, camouflage clothes, minuscule holes drilled on the shells. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Not the contents, but the collectible casings. How do you return everything you have stolen from us? Control the thing you most love at the root of your addiction. Folks camped outside Rita's house to have their tarot cards read before she aged and forgot who she was, forgot how to bathe, reeked of piss, chicken manure, eau de cologne. To schedule a consultation, men roll from under cars, stars in their own Cantinflas films, greasy hair, creme fraiche in their corners of their mouths. The women gossip incredulously after flattening corn on clay ovens for their patrones, matriarching all the ways we would outlast the policies of the rich. The thefts of Rita's favorite hen's brown eggs, the source of fantastical tales populated by ghostly, headless horsemen who abducted children if they ran away from home, or women pregnant with black magic frogs, or that man with a limp deemed hideous from false accruement. During sessions, I climbed the long vines of Rita's backyard tree, swing 8 feet from the ground with the visitors' children. One of us would plunge, rip a new skirt, a striped shirt passed down 3 generations. Our mothers would scare us by paying my great grandmother handsomely for a remedy to exile our demons once and for all. Leave them alone, she'd yell at them. They're just kids. Years later, I think about Rita's backyard. The trees that once swiveled their branches near the ground. It's none of your business what I do with my life, I hear Rita say, daughter of an indigenous woman and a man who, like most men in my family, left his breath on everything we now call mirror or past. A man who tried to rape Mama Chela, his daughter-in-law. Some say he did. Rita, who bought land with her own savings, a rare feat for a woman in those days in a country where women can lose their heads if they dye their hair the color of a gang's affiliation. Rita, who lost most of her land to the government on which Tegucigalpa's airport was built, which means that in the lines of my wide nose, my plump ears, my dense lips, I bear the burden of every arrival, every departure. My great grandmother, who resisted losing her memory but lost it anyway, as her son lost his, kicked in the bath, spat out the spoon, concocted spells so potent, indigenous secrets mixed with loss, which sojourn parallel, the strength of 1,000 stolen acres in her. The rest of us are still trying to figure it out why she shakes our houses at night when we all stood there in silence, watching her track the bandits' clues, not knowing all of us were stealing her eggs, all of us hungering for love. Thank you.
Wow, Roy, thank you so much. I just need to take a moment just to let that sink in. Everyone, keep showing the appreciation and your love there for Roy. Thank you so much, Roy, and my condolences to you, and also such deep appreciation for you being here tonight. Really, really appreciate it, and that was just fantastic. I'm putting in here the link to Roy Guzmán's poetry collection, Catrachos. Please pick up a copy so you can spend some time with those words. It's really, really amazing. All right, our next reader for the night is Wayétu Moore. Wayétu is the author of the memoir, The Dragons, the Giant, and the Women, and also the novel, She Would Be King. Wayétu is the founder of One More Book, and she's a graduate of Howard University, Columbia University, and the University of Southern California. She lives not too far away from me in Brooklyn, New York, where she is joining us. Hello, Wayétu, welcome.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Brian. And oh my gosh, Roy and Genevieve, what beautiful readings. And Roy, I echo Brian, my condolences to you and your family. Thank you for sharing tonight. I'm going to be reading from my memoir, which is The Dragons, the Giant, the Women. Just came out a couple weeks ago. And my family's from Liberia. We immigrated to the US when I was 5 years old. And I was raised in Texas. And my book, it is about how it was that my family was separated when the war in Liberia started. That's why we moved to the United States. And the book really just explores how it was that we were reunited, and also explores my journeys in, I guess, my identity, establishing my identity, determining it, giving it a name. While I grew up in Texas in a very white, homogenous, Southern conservative town, which was very different from where I had come from. So I'm actually going to read to you from a portion that is part of the contemporary section of my book. So I have, it's 5-year-old me, then present day me, then it's my mother's voice, and then back to 5-year-old me. And so I'm reading to you from present day me. A few years back, it's the beginning of the events that led me to return to Liberia after being away for about 26 years. D-Dot texted. I did not immediately answer. It said, "Did you read the article I sent?" I was on my way to meet a boy and I was late again. I had canceled an appointment with a therapist, my second in a row. I changed my clothes more times than I could count, and I almost sent a picture of the unremarkable dress to Wee for the boost I so desperately needed, the kind only she could give, with intentional spelling errors only teachers would make, and too many emojis. In high school, we did not have cell phones, no picture messages. Back then, we got ready at each other's houses with Brandy and Destiny's Child blasting in the background. So that night, I did not send a picture. I should not have read the article before the date, but I did. In the subway, on my way to meet that boy. The article was one of those institute memos, those think pieces, those essays based on empirical data of the select pool variety. Apparently, a sort of mating is less and less an option for Black women. Our eyelashes aren't curled at the right angle. We're prescriptive, wrongly named. We're undesirable again. We're the most likely to be swiped left, they say. We're drowning in our degrees and our solo travels and each other again. Who wrote this? I met up with him at a dive bar and I hoped he would remember my face before I would have to recall his. I promised this friend a few weeks before that I would stop ignoring men in the street after she sent me an essay about old-fashioned meetings, those in church, supermarket, bumped into each other in the street impossibilities that were once our religion. So I met this boy, this Johnny boy in the street. I never would have done that in my 20s, but I've grown. I know better now than not to live. And 2 weeks later, I was at a dive bar, nose in my phone, being corrupted by the contemporary doctrines of my unlovability and the reasons. Hey, he said, almost shouting, almost afraid to touch my shoulder. I found a seat underneath a John Wayne poster lit from above with a few string lights, dingy lights of pastel colors that blinked to the rhythm of those songs I had not heard for some time. What are you reading? Johnny boy asked, as if he'd known me for years, as if this was not the first time asking me that question. Familiar. Is this how love stories in a woman's 30s begin? I would not mind. Oh, just some essay, I answered and blushed. And I guess I was too eager to hide my phone because he prodded. It's some essay about how difficult it is for Black women to find husbands, I said finally, I think laughing, just as the waitress approached our table and she feigned a smile, an awkward smile, and glanced at him before rushing through our drink orders. She had heard me. When she left, Johnny boy was smiling, a nervous smile, but confident. He knew he was handsome. He said, those things could be annoying. My eyes questioned. How everything is about race now, you know? He continued, still nervous, but unflinching. Neither of us knew what it meant. I felt guilty for finding him endearing. I mean, I've dated Black girls before and it's been all good. I know other people who date, you know, it's just that I don't see color. Nika emailed, did you read that piece about the rise of Black girl, white boy relationships? She sent me the link. I was swirling, that's what they called it. Johnny Boy was different. Johnny Boy from the Midwest, from the West Coast, from New Jersey. He grew on me, but people looked at us as we walked hand in hand, as though we were naked but deformed, and they did not know if they should be offended or feel sorry for us. Us, those contrasting colors interlocked. Brooklyn was finicky in that way. It boasts of its progressiveness while at the same time is surprised by it. I showed Johnny Boy the article that night and he laughed as I thought he would. Then he said, you and your friends talk about race a lot. We do? I asked. And he nodded, a concerned nod, one with weight, one asking. Race was everywhere here, the here I call home now, although Johnny Boy avoided those conversations, although he could not see it. So instead, we laughed as much as we could, visited botanical gardens while he compared me to flowers, listened to records, went dancing, ate with friends, spoke to Mam and Papa on speaker, took a road trip, grocery shopped, went to the dog park, went shopping for pants for his interview, went shopping for a dress for that date night, went to a Liberian restaurant he had found online in Queens because he thought I would like it, went to the movies, went to shows, went to the Bronx, went to my accountant that one time, but we never went there. And Progress kept looking, kept staring, kept wondering what it was about him or about me that made us flaunt our corruption in that way. He was left, far left. It was 2013 or 2014, and he was white, and the Black girls were dying, and the Black boys were dying. He was angry. He felt guilty and ashamed. He was ambivalent. He touched my face. He kissed me long. He hated what happened to those countries in Africa, what happened to my family, our having to run and hide. He hated what was happening to those cities in the Midwest. Listened when I told him I'd experienced a thing again, at a store or at the office or on the street, and I thought the thing had happened because of my skin. It was because I was Black in this kingdom where Black was criminal, a stain, a deformity. A thing had happened and it reminded me of the first time, that time when I was a kid and I took too long to get my candy bar and that store owner pushed my sister and called us that word. But that was Texas, he said. But this is New York, he said. It doesn't matter. It's everywhere in this country, I said. I'm sorry, he said. I don't understand some people. We're all the same, he said. Our world would be so much stronger if we stopped seeing color. So he marched with me. He squeezed my hand throughout Brooklyn, but the weight of those girls and boys dying was heavy on my shoulders. Their names made a home on my tongue. I wondered who they were, how many things had happened before the one that finally took their lives. And Johnny Boy and I drifted apart because the heavier the burden on my shoulders, the harder I typed into the night. The more New York began to look like Texas, began to look like California, began to look like Baltimore, began to look like Florida. The more Johnny Boy reminded me of his blindness to the thing, of his love for me through the thing. Why didn't he see me? There were times he held me through the night. Those contrasting colors interlocked, gray eyes in the moonlight. You're special, he said, and I love you. He said, let me love you. And I never said it back. I needed time, I said. I'm just getting over my last relationship. Why do we make the ones who love us wait? Ashley called. She was crying. She wanted to hear my voice. I missed her, though I had seen her a week before. My phone was cold, and still I pressed it to my ear when I heard her whimper. We were in the news again. We were trending again. George Zimmerman was still free. Eric Garner had been choked to death. Michael Brown was an unarmed Black boy who was shot 6 times, at least 2 in the head, and it had killed him. I know, girl, I eased her. We'll march and call the congressman, I said. Write a think piece, I said. Write letters, I said, in this our country. But she told me in these moments she felt worthless. Each one made her feel worthless, invisible again, depressed again. Her tears sounded familiar, like that day in middle school running with the Black girls, that cutting music that would replay for the rest of our lives. My friends, these women I hid during storms with, these women I consumed so many of those joyous Brooklyn hours with. And I want to find the words, the poetry to give her the thanks she deserves for her shoulder, for stirring my ginger tea all those times my voice got lost in that job, man, city, for understanding what it was like to be at that table, To be a young girl just learning how much of the world's opinion of you differed from your loving ma'am's. Those girls helped me, they healed me, she heals me. But another thing happened and she forgot her power. Another thing happens and she becomes that little girl running, racing to safety, to be better than each other, to be better than ourselves, to be seen. In the shower that night, I thought of our conversation, her tears. I had taken my braids out because I wanted to run my fingers through my roots, my coils, to be reminded. I heard the front door open from inside the bathroom and Johnny Boy shouted, "Hello, and what are you doing?" "I'm washing my hair," I yelled back. "I took my braids out." "Oh, your fro is out, your fro is out again," he joked. "Doesn't washing it take forever?" he asked, and I could tell he was smiling. I didn't answer him. "Well, I guess we won't be going out to dinner tonight," he said. "Don't you wish you had hair like mine?" he asked, and I felt a chill of rage, shock, perplexity, exhaustion. Something I was not sit right away. Foam slid off my body and beads of water from my natural curls fell to my shoulders. I heard my breathing in my ears. "What the fuck did you just say?" I asked. And in the aftermath of the questions, in the silence, he could still hear my anger in his breathing. And I heard his footsteps approach the room. "Wait, whoa, what did I, no, it was a joke. I'm sorry. It was a bad joke, babe. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And he rambled and was still rambling when I opened the door, naked but not deformed. And the water was coming from my hair, but then the water was coming from my eyes. He had done a thing, but I would not run from him. He stared at me, dared not touch me, sorry, and I knew it. But he had said a thing and that day had already broken me. And I could still hear that cutting music. So loud it echoed, so I stood there until we both knew. Stood there until the echoes finished. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Wayétu. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Everyone, show some love for Wayétu in the chat there, please. That was amazing and powerful. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put here also the link to purchase Wayétu's new memoir, which I urge you guys all to check out. Very, 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 very powerful. You guys, we have the opportunity, you in the audience have the opportunity to ask some questions, which you can use the chat for. And so I will maybe ask a question while we wait for questions to come in, because I know it's a lot you guys just took in. But I have a question for you guys, for each of you, which is that I know, and Roy, I feel like maybe, I know you write poetry, but you're also an academic, right? And Genevieve and Wayétu, you've both written fiction and memoir. So one thing that I'm always curious about is, does the skills or the confidence that you pick up in writing in one area at all translate into the other area? Or was sitting down to write a novel after writing nonfiction something totally different? Or was sitting down to write a memoir after writing a novel totally different? And Roy, is there any at all connection between the academic writing that you do and the poetry? I'm not sure who wants to take that first, but whoever wants it. That's cool. You just think about it for a minute.
I can go first with that. I find writing fiction and nonfiction to be really different experiences. They definitely inform each other in my with how I approach, in terms of thinking about scene and, character development and bringing in senses and that kind of practice and what I want a story to do, whether it is based in reality or not, feels similar. I want the language to kind of be as rigorous in both instances, but even though fiction is what I feel the most connected to and what it's kind of like my deepest love and what I will always return to, I find for me writing writing nonfiction to come out at least in a quicker way. There's something about having a map of experience to work from that I can get caught up in a little bit more than with fiction. It always feels very, very slow and arduous to me. Whereas in some of the, more essayistic kind of personal accounts that I've written seem to take me to another place emotionally and mentally that comes out a little quicker.
Hmm. It's interesting. That makes me think of, I think, I don't know if this was Annie Dillard, but I attribute it to Annie Dillard, which is that with fiction, you sometimes know what the meaning is, but you don't know what the story is. Whereas with nonfiction, you know what the story is, but you're just trying to work on finding what it means, which is a very different kind of an exercise. But that's really interesting. Thank you, Genevieve.
I'll quickly add to that, that I think for me, I also write, someday maybe the world will see my fiction. Fiction is an interesting, I don't want to call it an exercise, because I know that for some people, it's the framework through which, they learn about different cosmologies, different ways of operating in the world. And so I think that it's really, it's such an important form. But one thing that, as Genevieve was talking about, one thing I was thinking about is this like strange phrase of like ethical responsibility, that when it comes to these different genres, I would say, it seems to me like we are, or at least American readers, are accustomed to particular contracts. This is what we expect of a novel. This is what we expect from a memoir, and there's all this stuff that's tied to truth. And I think one of the reasons I gravitate to poetry is because poetry ends up questioning all of that. It ends up questioning fiction. It ends up questioning nonfiction. It ends up questioning, truth versus my truth. And this is different for me when I'm doing, for instance, academic work. For academic work, it feels like the sentence has to carry so much weight, because not only am I writing about myself, perhaps, but I'm writing about communities and other people who perhaps may feel, who they may challenge my me at the sentence level. So I think for me, it's a question of different, maybe, contracts. Yeah.
Yeah. When you said the word truth, and I was triggered because I mean the obvious difference between writing memoir and fiction for me was that a censorship that happens naturally. Then you're sort of writing in resistance to that censorship in nonfiction. I mean, or in memoir specifically, because you go from sort of interrogating these characters and creating characters in fiction, and I had the freedom and flexibility. And then once that interrogation becomes personal, then I had the inclination to hold back on some of those truths, and asking myself whether or not I should ask, and confirm certain truths, especially as it pertains to my family. So that was the obvious, was this relationship with truth, the relationship with memory. Like, am I presenting my memory as a definitive truth? What responsibility do I have to the reader in that? But I would say also, I think there was something interesting that happens between memoir and fiction, and that in fiction you're dealing with, for me, I'm dealing with these abstractions that I'm trying to concretize through story, just very fundamentalist storytelling, right? Abstractions that of course are thematic and speak to the human condition. But then in memoir, I'm dealing with a very concrete story, and all of the abstractions of my personal journey are being exposed, and then I'm having to negotiate that during editing, and determine which abstractions serve the story, which abstractions should I refrain from to protect my family, to protect myself. And so it's a conversation and a constant tug of war, I would say, with those two things, abstractions and the concrete in both.
That's really interesting. It's always that question of censorship and family, I feel like, is one often comes up in, at least in classes that I teach, from students who want to know, like, how do you allow yourself or give yourself permission to write down those stories that you know are going to maybe cause pain in a member of your family, or at least cause a raised eyebrow and some consternation because of your version of the truth is different from the accepted version of the family truth.
Yeah. I did myself a favor, and the first draft, I wrote it out. It was sacred to me. It was something that I protected. And then in later drafts, that's when I began to share it and get input, because I do think that with memoir, you do have to be a bit protective, especially of your first few drafts, because then, as I said, thinking about the relationship with the reader, is it exclusively your truth if you're asking people to sort of fill in the memories? And so that was something that I was like constantly in conversation with while I was writing. And, after, in subsequent drafts, when I did present it to my parents and my siblings, it was the story, my memory was very closely aligned. And obviously it wasn't totally from my memory, because I had been influenced over time from stories that I'd heard, and things that I'd been exposed to as a kid or growing up, stories that I'd been exposed to. But I definitely think that they're the first draft, I would say, for anyone to keep it sacred.
I love that. The first draft, just for you. Put in there everything you want. I don't want to hog the questions. I've got more, but is there anyone in the audience who has a question for our authors this evening? And just chat it out in there. Because one thing that struck me about all of your writing was the importance of place in each of the things that you wrote, that you read this evening. And I was wondering, like, in the process of writing, do you, I guess, one, it sounds okay, are these all places that you're writing about that you've been to? And if so, like, what kind of a researches do you do in order to bring that alive to yourself? Do you go back to photographs or diary entries? Do you just rely totally on your memory and just try to dive deep into that? What do you do to bring alive the setting for yourself? Genevieve, do you want to start? Because that was, like, from the get-go, the, like, kind of revival, like, scene that you read was so vivid.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. Because Alabama, it's where I grew up. I haven't lived there since, for over a decade and a half, or over a decade at least. But it's a place that's very, like, that has like a very strong presence in my mind and in my memory. And I go back sometimes less often than I would like. I've lived really far away from Alabama for many years, especially when I was writing this book. I lived in Portland and then also in Amsterdam for many years. And so a lot of times Alabama was alive to me most in my imagination. And I knew it was important for me to go to Alabama and visit and be there so that I could really ground myself in the specifics of smell and taste, and just really, what does this street look like? What do the trees look like? How does the air feel on my skin? So I went to visit my parents, who still live there, a couple of times while I was writing the novel. And actually did something that I'd never done before with writing. And I used the audio recording app on my phone, and I would drive or walk around, and I would just kind of speak into my phone what I was seeing. And I would just describe the dirt or the fences, what kind of traffic I saw, the different plant life. I saw the way people spoke, certain turns of phrases that I had forgotten about. I would name those. And I just paid attention in a way that was very unique to this writing process. I don't know that I think as writers, we're always noticing and we're always kind of cataloging things that stick out to us. But I think going to this place and knowing that that was so important to telling the truth of the place that I wanted to write about, that I was even more attuned and doing a lot more note taking. And that was in addition to, doing my own research. I read old history, like textbooks from Alabama, like history books from high school and middle school. I went to high school, middle school there, but I didn't remember what was in our history books, which is like really fucked up. But you could find those online, and and I kind of did some snooping around on Google Maps and things like that too. So a lot of, kind of a multi-pronged approach.
That's really cool. Roy, how about you?
That's a very, very good question. I actually went to Honduras in 2018. So this was during, I guess, the initial revision process of the book. And so I was able to confirm some stuff. But one thing that I kept sticking to, and again, this is poetry, right? And I keep thinking about, like, there's this Bjork quote that is very popular among people, which to me, I love Bjork, but I think that this quote, like, is it needs to be unpacked. She says, like, don't let poets lie to you. And to me, I feel like the reason why that's a load of BS, and why not every poem can subscribe to that same standard, it's because many people, like, have to realistically lie to survive. And one thing I have been thinking about, especially when it comes to, like, the details, like what Genevieve was talking about with, like, some of these, like, poems, I was worried sometimes about the sense of place, and almost thinking like a historian slash, like a historian. And I remember this quote from someone who came by way of someone who said that the poem, don't treat the poem like this is the court of law, right? Like, you're not in front of a jury asking them to, quote unquote, forgive you for some kind of crime, right? Whether or not you forgive yourself for whatever you did or whatever happened to you, that's a whole other story. But I should not treat my poem as that space where I'm trying to, like, I want people to fact check every little thing. At the same time, I feel like, that, but also the fact that I, as a Honduran writer, get the opportunity to be able to publish through a press like Grey Wolf. To me, I'm like, a lot of Black writers say this, people of color, Black writers, we only get one chance when it comes to our first book. And if I fuck this up, I was like, I'm not going to get another chance to write, a second Catrachos kind of book. So I did feel a personal responsibility to make sure that, my geography was right, and of course I do academic work. So that's already informing a lot of what I do. But I want to make sure that I do remind, especially poets, that there is a lot of free license, creative license that should, happen when you're drafting poetry. And then, if you really want to fact check what you're writing, where you're writing it in, that's important, but it's really up to you.
Thank you. I hope you writers out there are taking notes. Voice memos, old textbooks. And I love this stuff about the thinking about poetry and the question of lying and truth and leaning into the creativity of the verse and letting yourself find your own way. I love it. Wayétu, how about you?
Yeah, so when you asked the question, I guess I haven't been asked this question before, so it is a great one, dealing with there's a very obvious place that is featured in my book, which is Liberia, right? And in many ways, because I would say immigrant narratives or immigrant stories, they tend to function in the binary. So it's like the place you came from and the place that you're going, etc. But I really wanted to expand on that and consider spiritual geography, like how even when I was in one place, which exists in all of the books that I've read within this genre, how the these places are coexisting with each other, even if your physical body is in one place, your spiritual body is occupying both the home country and the new country, right? And so my relationship with place and my negotiation of place was in the spiritual. How do I explore that on the page? How will that translate on the page when people see that when you are removed or displaced, or when you have multiple geographical spaces that you call home, place becomes something different. It becomes something that is very broad. And so that's what I was in conversation with while writing.
Thank you. I love thinking that spiritual dimension to it beyond just the purely physical. Again, another very like something that a text and writing can really allow you to explore.
Mm-hmm.
That's so unique to that. That's wonderful. Okay, final question here, and I see Roy. There's one here specific to you, but I want to just ask this last one that Gina asked because it's I think applicable to all of you. When writing memoir, poetry, or fiction that takes place from the point of view of your younger self or a character that is much younger than you are now, what kinds of exercises or techniques do you use to channel that voice?
Honestly, that voice, if I'm totally honest with you and with myself, I would say that voice was obtained through editing. I mean, the first draft was very much not similar to the contemporary portion but I mean the differentiation was harder fought, and so I did most of the work for this book and while editing. That's when I had to sort of take out some of the sort of obvious linguistic sensibilities that were in subsequent chapters that featured me as an adult or even featured my mother's voice. My exploration of voice in this book, it was all through editing, to be honest. But I would say something that helped was just reading books that explored that childlike voice. Up from the Blue by Susan Henderson was a really, really great one. She did an extraordinary job in a child voice, but it was a smart, sort of aware child that was dealing with a kind of trauma, and that was helpful. So. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. I'm not familiar with that. Thank you. Genevieve, what about you?
I think for me, I'm trying, it's an interesting question that I haven't thought much about how I refined a younger voice. I mean, I often thought about I often reflected on this time in my life when I was the narrator's age, which was 16, 17. And I think that is a time that I often kind of think about when I'm writing or creating something. And I'm not really sure why, other than that it's a time of great transformation. I think that I find very fascinating. It's this moment on the cusp of adulthood where you're starting to reckon with these greater questions of identity and place and belonging that echo into the rest of our lives, or at least for me, really echoed into the rest of my life. And so I think that moment has always been very fascinating to me, this sort of coming of age tale or moment of like searching for your for your place. And so I think it was less about thinking of like, how do I make sure this person sounds like they're 16, 17, and more thinking about like, what was I preoccupied with at that time? I guess one thing that feels relevant to that is that because I was talking about teenagers that were growing up at a later time than me, there was a technology element and sort of both an emoji and, you know, an abbreviation speak that I entered into some of the dialogue in my writing. And I, you know, became like a keen observer of that on the internet for a while as I was writing.
That sounds like fun kind of research to do. Thank you. I was reminded, it's interesting, I was reminded of your reading, when you were reading of the Donna Tartt novel, The Little Friend, which also has some revivalist elements to it and is about a young voice. Yeah, it was very, very cool in the best of ways. Roy, what about you?
I'm just gonna add to these amazing points. Definitely what Wayétu said about the revising. Yes, absolutely. What Genevieve said too led me to think about. So one of the poems in this collection, for instance, is inspired by Arthur, the animated educational series, and it's in that sort of like I believe it's a 12-year-old voice. That's how old I was, I believe, at the time, 12-year-old. And what's interesting about that is some of the things that I think that YA writers, for instance, are doing incredible things right now. And one thing that I've learned from many YA writers is, and I think from this question that Gina asked, in terms of thinking about exercises and techniques, I was thinking about avoiding this tendency to infantilize the child. The child is, at least for me, when I think about me as a child and me writing the child in these poems, the child, you know, takes the world very seriously too. And I think that there's a responsibility that you have to that child in making sure that that child isn't this two-dimensional figure. One thing I will say in terms of a technique that's helped me in thinking about a lot of these poems is some of these poems I would actually have like reading lists. So if a poem like the Arthur poem, if I was dealing with issues about the child in a Lutheran school, in a Lutheran church, watching this TV show, I would make myself watch like children's shows. I would also like, add books, add little poems, add, read whimsical poems as a way to, again, inhabit the space of the child. But again, understanding that the world of the child is very much a serious world, right? That even when you're being playful, it's an intentional kind of playfulness.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roy Guzmán. Thank you, Genevieve Hudson. Thank you, Wayétu Moore. This has been such a fantastic night. Thank you guys, and the audience too. That was. Thank you, Gina. That was a great question. Real quick, just a couple announcements before we go. I want to give a shout out to the Blackout Bestseller List initiative, which was kind of started online by Amistad Books, initiative to fill the bestseller list with Black voices. If you're not familiar with it, check out the hashtag, kind of, I think, on any social media site at this point, and find recommendations of books to buy by Black authors, find recommendations of Black-owned bookstores from which to buy them. I'll be sharing a whole bunch tomorrow on the Antibody, or the series Twitter, but there's so many out there. So please let's do it. Let's get as many Black voices as we can up on the bestseller list. That would be an amazing thing to do, amazing message to send right now. I mentioned this at the top. I will be back here next Tuesday with Zaina Arafat reading from her debut novel, You Exist Too Much. Diksha Basu will be here reading from her second novel, Destination Wedding, and Annie Kim will be reading from her latest poetry collection, Eros Unbroken. That's the link there to the Zoom if you wanna come check it out, and I'll put up here too the full list. If you are interested in seeing who else is coming, you can go to my website there and check it out. Cool. Thank you again to all three of the readers. Thank you to the audience so much. You guys were great. Thanks to Literary Hub. This will be archived on their virtual book channel probably tomorrow. Until next week, everybody, stay healthy, stay optimistic, and keep reading books. Thank you so much, you guys.
Bye, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Genevieve. Thanks so much, Roy.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thanks, Hannah.